Cloverfield Regional Medical Center had stood at the corner of Marsh and Elkwood since 1951, and for most of those decades, it had been the kind of hospital where people actually wanted to work. That changed the morning. Dorian Holt walked through the front doors with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was not a doctor. He had never treated a patient, never stood in an operating room, never held someone's hand while delivering a diagnosis. His background was in corporate restructuring, hotels, mostly, and before that a regional airline that had shed 400 jobs in 18 months before quietly folding. The board of Cloverfield Regional had hired him anyway, because the quarterly numbers were soft, and someone with an MBA and a firm handshake had convinced them that healthcare was, at its core, just another service industry. The staff learned quickly what kind of man Dorian Holt was. Within his first 2 weeks, he canceled the hospital's contract with its primary linen supplier and switched to a cheaper vendor whose sheets arrived thin and slightly gray. He eliminated the overnight nutrition cart for long-term ward patients, citing non-essential expenditure. He froze all equipment maintenance requests pending a comprehensive operational review that nobody ever saw the results of. He had the physician's lounge repainted and refurnished with a leather sectional and a coffee machine that cost more than a month of a housekeeper's salary. And he issued memos, constant memos, single-spaced, full of corporate language about optimizing resource allocation and right-sizing departmental overhead. Each one landed in the hospital's internal system like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples moved through every unit. The ER, the surgical floor, the ICU, all of it. The memo that arrived on a Tuesday in March was different from the others, though nobody recognized it at the time. It announced a new staffing initiative. All per diem nursing staff would be reclassified. Overtime approval now required 48 hours advance notice and sign-off from department directors. Night shift would be reduced by 15% beginning the following pay period. In the ICU, a nurse named Cora Baines read the memo twice, folded it in half, and set it on the break room table without saying a word. She had been at Cloverfield for 3 years. To most people on the floor, she was unremarkable in the way that competent people sometimes are. Steady, quiet, always early, never loud about it. She wore her dark hair pulled back, dressed in plain navy scrubs, kept to herself during lunch. New residents sometimes forgot she was there until they needed her, and then they were always grateful she was. What almost nobody at Cloverfield knew was where Cora Baines had come from. Before nursing, before the ICU, before Cloverfield, she had spent 6 years as a flight medic with the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She had kept soldiers alive in the back of helicopters over terrain that didn't appear on any civilian map. She had made decisions in 45 seconds that most emergency physicians would spend 20 minutes debating. She had been decorated twice and left the service quietly, without fanfare, because that was how she had always done everything. She had not become a civilian nurse because she needed a softer life. She had become a civilian nurse because she believed, with a stubbornness that surprised even her, that the work itself mattered, the patients mattered. The individual human being in the bed, frightened and in pain, mattered. Dorian Holt had no framework for a person like that. The first real sign that something was wrong with the equipment came in early April. It was a morning shift, busy but not critical, and a patient in Bay 4, a 63-year-old man named Bernard, who had been admitted following bypass surgery, began showing subtle signs of respiratory distress. The numbers on his monitor drifted in the wrong direction for about 11 minutes before Cora caught it. She checked the ventilator settings, checked the tubing connections, and then stood very still for a moment looking at the infusion pump attached to Bernard's IV line. The Apex Model 7 pumps had been in service at Cloverfield for 4 years. They were reliable machines, mostly, but the units on the ICU floor were aging, and 2 nurses had already filed maintenance requests in February, noting that the touchscreens were sluggish and occasionally froze mid-cycle. Both requests had been flagged as non-urgent under Holt's review freeze, One had been closed automatically after 30 days with no action taken. Cora silenced the pump's local alarm, which had not actually sounded, which was the problem, and manually verified the flow rate. The machine read 12 milliliters per hour. The actual delivery, she calculated from the remaining reservoir volume and the timestamp, was closer to 0. The pump had stopped moving medication sometime in the previous hour and a half. It had not told anyone. She switched Bernard to a backup unit, adjusted his settings, and spent the next 40 minutes at his bedside until his numbers stabilized. Then she wrote it up, every detail: the timestamp, the reservoir calculation, the failure mode, the absence of audible alarm. She filed it with biomedical engineering and CC'd her charge nurse, Patricia Dunn. Patricia read it and went pale. "This is the third one," Patricia said. Cora looked at her. Third pump failure or third silent failure? Third silent failure. The other two were on the step-down unit. I didn't connect them until just now. Cora was quiet for a moment. Who approved the maintenance freeze? Patricia didn't answer, because they both knew the answer. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. It did not happen in a hallway with witnesses. Cora Baines was not the kind of person who made scenes. What she did instead was methodical and, in its own way, devastating. She spent her next 2 days off, which she had been planning to use to repaint her kitchen, sitting at her kitchen table with a legal pad, building a timeline. She pulled every maintenance request she could access through the hospital's internal system. She cross-referenced them against the equipment logs from biomedical engineering, which were semi-public within the hospital network if you knew where to look. She found 7 pump-related anomalies in 60 days, 3 silent failures, 2 instances of alarm delay exceeding 90 seconds, 2 unresolved calibration flags. She also found something else, buried in the procurement records, which were accessible to nursing staff because nobody had thought to restrict them. Was a contract amendment dated 6 weeks after Holt's arrival. Cloverfield had extended its lease on the Apex Model 7 fleet, rather than proceeding with the planned upgrade to the newer Model 9. The upgrade had been budgeted and approved before Holt came. The lease extension had saved the hospital approximately $340,000 in capital expenditure for the current fiscal year. It had also kept 14 aging pumps in active clinical use past their recommended service cycle. Cora read the contract amendment 3 times. Then she called her brother-in-law, who was a healthcare attorney in Cincinnati, and asked him a single question. At what point does a hospital administrator's decision to delay equipment upgrades constitute negligence? He called her back 40 minutes later and talked for a long time. She returned to Cloverfield the following Monday with her legal pad and a USB drive. The meeting she had requested with Dorian Holt had been declined twice through his assistant, a nervous young man named Perry, who seemed to genuinely feel bad about it. On her 3rd attempt, Cora had simply written in the subject line, "ECU equipment, 3 silent pump failures, documentation enclosed." Perry called her back within the hour. Holt's office was on the 4th floor, in the administrative wing that had been renovated when he arrived. The carpet was new. The furniture was heavy and dark. There was a framed print on the wall, abstract, expensive looking, and a coffee machine on the credenza that Cora recognized as the same model from the physician's lounge renovation, the one that cost $4,200. Holt stood when she came in, which she had not expected. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of even tan that came from somewhere warm and expensive. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who had attended a lot of leadership seminars. "Cora," he said, "thank you for coming up." "Thank you for seeing me," she said, and sat down. She placed the legal pad on her knee and the USB drive on his desk. He glanced at the drive without picking it up. "Perry said you had some concerns about equipment. 3 of our Apex Model 7 pumps have experienced silent failures in the past 60 days, Cora said. Silent meaning no audible alarm, meaning a patient can be receiving 0 medication while the pump displays normal readings. In one case, the failure lasted approximately 90 minutes before it was caught, manually. Holt's expression was attentive and carefully neutral. That sounds like a biomedical issue. Have you filed with the department? Yes. I've also filed with the department twice before, once in February and once in March, and both requests were closed under the equipment review freeze without action. The review process is, Mr. Holt, Cora said, and her voice was not loud and it was not angry, it was simply flat. I want to show you something. She reached across his desk, not asking, just doing it, and opened the USB drive on his computer. He watched her do it with an expression she couldn't fully read. She pulled up the timeline, dates, incident numbers, pump serial numbers, failure modes. She walked him through it without hurrying, the way she had once briefed mission parameters to pilots who needed to understand exactly what the situation was before they flew into it. The lease extension on the Model 7 fleet saved $340,000, she said. That's in the procurement records. The upgrade that was canceled would have replaced these 14 units. The 3 that have failed are all in the cohort past their recommended service cycle. Holt was quiet for a moment. Are you making an accusation? I'm presenting documentation, she said. What you do with it is your decision, but I want to be direct with you about one thing. She looked at him steadily. If a patient dies because of a preventable equipment failure that was preceded by documented, unaddressed maintenance requests, that documentation will exist regardless of what happens in this room today. It already exists. I have copies. The silence that followed was not comfortable. Holt leaned back slightly. The easy warmth had gone out of his posture. He was looking at her the way people sometimes looked at things they had underestimated. What is it you want? He said. I want the equipment review freeze lifted for all patient care devices immediately, Cora said. I want the 14 Model 7 units inspected by biomedical engineering within 72 hours. I want the 3 units that have failed taken out of service today. And I want the maintenance request system reviewed so that clinical staff can escalate equipment concerns without administrative delay. That's a significant operational ask. Yes, she said, it is. She stood up and picked up her legal pad. She left the USB drive on his desk. Thank you for your time, Mr. Holt, she said, and walked out. She did not know, when she walked back through the administrative wing and took the elevator down to the ICU, whether any of it would matter. She had been in situations before where she had done everything correctly and it had mattered anyway, only in the small ways. The patient who survived, the flight that landed, the one thing she could actually control. She had learned a long time ago to separate what she could do from what she could determine. What she could do, she had done. What happened next was not entirely within her control, but it happened faster than she had expected. A patient named Gerald Fitzwilliam, 67 years old, admitted for post-operative monitoring following a knee replacement, had been connected to an Apex Model 7 pump on the step-down unit for 43 hours when the unit failed silently on a Thursday evening. Unlike Bernard's case, which Cora had caught through attentiveness and pattern recognition, Gerald's failure was caught by a nursing student named Angela Moss, who was on her 3rd clinical rotation and happened to be doing a manual chart review as part of her coursework assignment. Angela found the discrepancy between the pump's displayed rate and the actual volume delivered, flagged it immediately to her supervising nurse, and the situation was resolved without patient harm. But Angela also, because she was 23 and had grown up in a world where you documented things digitally and sent them to people, took photographs of the pump's display and the IV bag and the timestamp on the monitor, and she texted them to her clinical instructor at the nursing school. Her clinical instructor had a colleague who worked in hospital quality assurance. That colleague filed a report with the state health department on Friday morning. The state health department sent an inspector to Cloverfield Regional on Monday. Cora was not involved in any of this. She was working her shift, caring for patients, and did not learn about the state inspection until she passed the inspector in the hallway near the supply room and recognized the badge. The inspection took 4 days. The inspectors reviewed maintenance logs, procurement records, equipment service histories, and incident reports. They interviewed nursing staff, biomedical engineers, and department directors. They pulled the same documents Cora had pulled and several she hadn't been able to access. When the preliminary findings were shared with hospital leadership on the following Thursday, Dorian Holt was in the room. Cora was not, but Patricia Dunn was, and Patricia told her about it afterward in the break room in a low voice with the door closed. The findings cited 14 equipment maintenance violations, including 3 that the report characterized as presenting risk of serious patient harm. They cited the documentation trails, specifically the filed maintenance requests, and the dates they were closed without action. They cited the lease extension decision and the timeline of the Model 7 failures against the backdrop of the canceled upgrade. The hospital board convened an emergency session 2 days later. Holt did not attend. His office, Patricia heard from Perry, had been cleared over the weekend. The interim administrator was Dr. Francis Okafor, the hospital's chief medical officer, who had been at Cloverfield for 19 years. One of her first actions was to lift the equipment review freeze across all patient care departments. Her second was to authorize the Model 9 upgrade that had been canceled. She also asked to speak with the nurse, who had first documented the pump failures. That meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon in a small conference room near the ICU nursing station. Dr. Okafor was a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and an unhurried manner that Cora recognized as the kind that came from having been the most competent person in the room so many times that you stopped needing to prove it. She had Cora's incident reports in front of her. She had read them, clearly, because she referenced specific details without looking at the pages. You identified the pattern before anyone else did, Dr. Okafor said. The pattern was there to find, Cora said. I had time to look. Most people don't look when it means more work for themselves. Cora didn't respond to that. Dr. Okafor looked at her for a moment, then looked back at the reports. I want to offer you the lead ICU nursing role. It's been vacant for a while. The position involves equipment oversight, staff coordination, quality improvement. Cora was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that, she said. I genuinely do, but I'd rather stay where I am. Dr. Okafor raised an eyebrow slightly. On the floor, yes, Cora said. The patients need nurses who know how to be present. Management needs people who know how to manage. I'm not sure I'm the second kind. You filed a complete documentation package and presented it to an administrator who outranked you by 4 levels, Dr. Okafor said. I'd argue that qualifies. That was different, Cora said. That was a safety issue. I was doing what the situation required. Dr. Okafor studied her. Is that how you think about it? The older woman nodded slowly. She folded her hands on the table. All right, she said. Then let me ask you this. Would you be willing to consult on the equipment review process? Not a title, not extra hours. Just your eyes on things that come through the safety reporting system. Cora considered this. Yes, she said. I can do that. Good, Dr. Okafor said. She gathered the reports and stood. The floor's lucky to have you. Cora said thank you and meant it, and then she went back to the ICU. The afternoon was busy. There was a patient in Bay 2 who had been extubated that morning and was anxious and needed reassurance more than medication. There was a family in the waiting room who had been there since the previous day and needed someone to explain, patiently and honestly, what the next 48 hours were likely to look like. There was a nursing student, a different one from Angela, a young man named Deshawn, who was quiet and observant, and reminded Cora a little of herself, who had asked her, tentatively, if she could walk him through the pump calibration check that had become mandatory across the unit following the new protocols. She walked him through it twice. She showed him exactly what to look for, what the numbers should say, and what they sometimes said when something was wrong. She explained the gap between what a machine displays and what a machine delivers, and why that gap could matter more than almost anything else in the room. Deshawn listened carefully. He took notes in a small spiral notebook. At the end, he looked up and said, "How do you know what to look for if it's not showing an alarm?" "You look anyway," Cora said. "The alarm is a backup. You're the first line. He wrote that down. The new Model 9 pumps arrived 6 weeks later. The biomedical team ran a full training session for nursing staff on the step-down unit and the ICU. The session was mandatory, which was new, and it covered not just operation but failure modes and escalation protocol. Cora attended and said nothing for most of it, and at the end, when the presenter asked if there were questions, she raised her hand and asked about the silent fail-logging feature on the new units. Specifically, whether it transmitted to a central monitoring station or only to the local display. There was a short pause. The presenter checked his materials. Local display only, he said. Okay, Cora said, so manual verification is still necessary. Correct. She nodded, made a note. That was the whole exchange. Patricia Dunn, standing next to her, said quietly, "You know they're going to end up making you charge nurse, whether you want it or not." "They can try," Cora said. Patricia smiled. Holt never knew what hit him. Cora thought about that for a moment. "He knew," she said. "He just didn't think it would come from this direction." She clipped her pen back onto her badge and walked out into the hallway. The floor was its ordinary organized chaos. Call lights, rolling carts, the distant sound of a monitor alarm, the particular institutional smell of antiseptic and recycled air that she had stopped noticing years ago. A transporter was pushing an empty wheelchair toward the elevator. Two residents were conferring in low voices outside a patient's room. Someone had left a coffee cup on top of the nurse's station desk, and the charge nurse was moving it with the expression of someone who had asked about this before. It looked, from the outside, completely ordinary. Cora Baines walked back to her patient in Bay 2, checked his vitals, adjusted his pillow, and asked him how he was doing. He said he was scared. She sat down in the chair beside his bed and said, "Tell me about it." And she listened. The way she had always listened. Completely. Without looking at the clock, as if the next thing on her list could wait, because right now this was the thing that mattered, and she had learned long ago, in places far harder than this, that knowing the difference between what could wait and what could not was not a management skill. It was the whole job.